Welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Monday, December 23rd, 2024. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Rice on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? A chapter of that book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet, and it's a tool I've been using to great effect for 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also listen to a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one that have been curated out of the last 14 years of shows that have been done. And those specific shows would be those in which people had called in and been stepped through a worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to those even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefits from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. If you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We help people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so. You can send me an email at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a comment or a question from you through an email, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. Alternatively, you can download the Nedl app and be listening to the show through the Nedl app, and that would give you the option to type a comment or actually raise a hand to speak with us live. Nedl is Nedl in your app store, and it's about listening to lots and lots of radio stations absolutely free. So it's called the Radio Tuner, the Nedl app in your app store. So here we are, Christmas week, a couple days before Christmas. Plenty of time for comments and questions. If you're listening through the app, please feel free to type a comment or put a hand up to read a question, even if it seems like we're in the middle of talking about something, reading something, or what some people refer to as a monologue. I always view that as adding to the show when people decide to raise a hand and ask a question, and it makes it far easier for these shows to make it to highlight status or best of status. Something I've learned about myself is that I work better in in that collegial interaction, in the banter back and forth, when somebody's playing a straight person to another person, that's when the flow gets going, and I've known that about myself for a lot of years now, that if I'm preparing a talk to give, to make a presentation, whether it's a church group or a business group or a community college or something, they're never as good as when I just get into the banter with somebody, whether it's in the support group or when people call the internet show and they raise questions. Even if people are pushing back against what's being offered, what the teachings are, either through the Course in Miracles or Way of Mastery or Butterflies Are Free to Fly or A Walk in the Physical or A Course of Love, which is, we've had a recommendation to go through the Course of Love this next year, which, again, I'll put the request out there. If you have a comment or a thought that you think be a good book for us to read and discuss on the Mind Shifters Radio, I'm all ears. Love to hear it. And I'll extend that to the idea of accepting recommendations about people that I could interview either for Mind Shifters Radio or for the On Your Mind podcast hosted by Journey's Dream. And I haven't mentioned that in a while, but the Journey's Dream is a nonprofit that was started by 4 people whose lives were dramatically changed by mental health struggles. And so they asked me to be on the board, and they said, as a board member, everybody has to be in charge of a committee, and you'll be in charge of the committee that runs a podcast. So for about 5 years now, we've been trying to do one a week. We haven't succeeded, but we have over 187 podcasts that we've done, and they're available absolutely free where you get your podcasts or on the onyourmindpodcast.org as a URL, or you can go to journeysdream.org/podcast and get there. And there's a wealth of topics that we've covered, from people who run residential facilities for people who are trying to navigate through a mental health challenge with little or no medications from psychiatrists, or the functional medicine approach, or the holistic approach, if you will. We've interviewed people who've had lived experience with mental health challenges. We've interviewed people who've recovered from severe trauma. We've interviewed people who are a number of people who've been trained as psychiatrists and then realized that that wasn't a very effective model. That's the idea of the allopathic approach of matching a list of symptoms with a list of medications isn't very effective. And so they went ahead and got functional medicine training and or integrative medicine training. And now they practice this specialty of psychiatry in a very different way. They look at the entire person. They look at nutrition and hormone balance and sense of purpose in life and connection to community and the therapeutic approaches that can aid that. So all of those are available as a free resource. And they're playing with AI on that website, on the Journey's Dream website, to try and get this database of 187 different episodes searchable by topic and by keyword. And so if you go there, if you check out thejourneysdream.org/podcast and you search for a topic or a name or a keyword, and you have good success or you don't have good success, that's another thing I'd love to hear from you about. And the email again is tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. So, what's on your mind? What would we like to do? What would be of service to people as we're pushing towards the end of the year? There's, as I mentioned, a nice, clear, strong request by somebody to get back into reading The Course of Love. And The Course of Love was another channeled work. Mary somebody, I forget her name, Perrin, I think. But we read big chunks of A Course in Miracles a couple of years ago. I meant to say A Course of Love a couple of years ago. We read through all of the workbook lessons from the Course of Miracles this year before last. No, I guess that was 3 years ago. And then we did the Way of Mastery, and then we did another year of a collection of different books, and then we went and redid the Way of Mastery this year. So, if you've got strong feelings one way or another about that, please let us know. The Course of Love is a lot of people think of it in terms of kind of a companion to A Course in Miracles. It has a number of different books, and what I'm reading from when I'm reading in A Course in Love is the combined volume. Book 1 is referenced as the Course, Book 2 as the treatise, and Book 3 as the dialogues. So one of the things I really like to do is talk about J.M., who is the gentleman that channeled with the Way of Mastery. He was asked once in an email about what's the difference between, or what are the conflicts between A Course in Miracles and the Way of Mastery? And his response was stellar. I mean, his prolonged response to what are the differences or problems between the Way of Mastery and Course in Miracles. And essentially, he was talking about how teachers have to teach to students where they are. And so a lot of what he says in that email response, I'm trying to pull up his email response. He had a I think I have it here. So he says, I've had this question come up a few times lately. What's the difference between A Course in Miracles and the Way of Mastery, and where do they conflict? And Jam's response begins with what I like to do when I get questions like this is, let's clarify the language. What do you mean conflict? And what's your perception of the conflict? And, you know, take the key words and make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So JM says, first, here's perceived conflict. When you're looking upon teachings that come from the very highest levels of wisdom, it's the teachings themselves that reveals the current limit of our own awareness. Having said that, let me begin by sharing a critical universal truth that all seeking and awakening must begin with. And this is the way Yeshua put it to me many years ago. And here's the quote: teaching is an art, not a science. All forms of teaching serve to sever the mind or the soul from its infatuation with the illusions it has generated. And then it's entered into those illusions. He says the wise teacher speaks the language of the student first, then leads them beyond the very limits that they do not know imprison them. So that's the quote from Yeshua through J.M. from years ago. And then J.M. goes on and says, both A Course in Miracles and The Way of Mastery are expressions of this teaching art aimed at reaching downward into the labyrinth of where the student is and providing ways and means for them to enter, and depending upon their devotion and desire and commitment, to move through the process towards enlightenment. James says, I am not a Course in Miracles student. I am a disciple of Yeshua, who is the master teacher in charge of what they're calling the atonement. He has selectively led me to small segments of A Course in Miracles. And as far as I can tell, there is no conflict at all if one goes far enough into this process of enlightenment. He said, I've had many, many course students come to me and come to the Way of Mastery as a set of teachings, who frankly seem to be suffering in a, quote, stuckness, close quotes. It appears that they get stuck in a purely mental approach to waking, and this is a very common malaise that can occur if one doesn't have access to teachers who have themselves gone beyond the level of purely mental and intellectual understanding. Because those people will be limited to meeting the student's deeper instructions with little more than a recourse to the ideas and statements about capital R reality. And yet they don't necessarily have the skillful art that can operate at these subtle, deep levels of the soul itself, and not even know how to, quote, seduce, close quotes, the mind and seduce it out of its ruts of thinking and perceiving. So in a nutshell, some students follow the lead of some A Course in Miracles teachers, and they say the body and the world are simply unreal. And in parentheses, he says, there is a sense in which this is true, closed parentheses. But those people then tend to discount all kinds of things like feeling and the breath or any need to participate in growing one's capacity to serve others. And if you've been with us this past year, reading The Way of Mastery, there's a whole segment in this last couple of lessons that says the key to joy is through service. And so those people who talk about how you don't really need to pay attention to your feelings or use the breath or participate in growing your capacity to serve others, they're not really following the teachings of things like the Way of Mastery. He says, personally, I know that that particular phase of the waking process, I was stuck there for a while myself. It's actually found in many forms of spirituality around the world. And he says, unfortunately, it can be a clever way to avoid doing any real ownership of my egoic patterns. And it can be a way to avoid any real transformation. Seeing the unreality of the world, the self, and the purpose of creation is actually just a first step, as extraordinary as that might seem. What's often missed is the overall context of the Course in Miracles and the lack of understanding where it fits along the spectrum of awakening and the audience that relates to it. He says there are certainly passages in it that reveal what comes once this radical correction in what I call the seat of the soul is truly completed. So there's work to do, as Dr. Michael Rice says. There's paying attention to what you're feeling, not avoiding the feelings, not running away from them, but allowing them and letting them teach you. There's working with the breath. There is awakening from the intellect. There is branching out and understanding that the intellect is just a very simple tool that's been given to us to be used in very specific circumstances and for very limited purposes. And as that happens, we grow in what the Way of Mastery calls the awakened heart. We grow in our capacity to comprehend a level of having found something rather than constantly searching for something. We expand our ability to be rather than constantly work at doing. So in the Course of Love, the combined book, it starts out with a prelude. It says, "This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. The time for you to take it is now. You are ready and miracles are needed." It says, "Pray for all those who are in need of miracles. To pray is to ask. But for what are you asking?" This first instruction in this Course in Miracles is to begin with asking. All are in need of miracles. This is the first step in miracle readiness, asking for it to be included in what we do here. By asking and praying for all those in need of miracles, you're praying for them to learn as you learn. You're asking to link your mind with all minds. You're asking to end your separated state and to learn in a state of unity. This is a basic recognition that this is the only way you learn. The separated self or the ego does not learn. Even when ego has taken many courses and received many teachings, the ego has not learned, but has merely become threatened. Spirit does not need a course in miracles. If the ego cannot learn and the spirit does not need to learn, then who is this course and all other such courses prepared for? Learning our true identity, the identity of the capital S self, that capital S self that is capable of learning who you are at deeper levels is something everyone must do. Can the ego ever learn this? Never. Does the spirit need to? No. Well, then who is this course for? This is a basic question that was not adequately answered in A Course in Miracles. While A Course in Miracles is meaningless to the ego and unnecessary to spirit, it would seem to have no audience at all if these two are the only two states that exist. Since it is impossible to be part of spirit and part spirit and part ego, assuming that there would be such a state in which learning could take place would be meaningless. The world as a state of being as a whole has entered a time brought on largely by A Course in Miracles in which readiness for miracle-mindedness is upon it. A Course in Miracles opened a door by threatening the ego. All those who, with egos weakened, walked this world with the hope of leaving ego behind, with that miracle-minded intent, those have awakened into human beings as a new identity. They've ushered in a time of ending our identity crisis. And not since Yeshua walked the earth has such a time been upon humankind. So what is it in you that's capable of learning? What is it in you that recognizes that ego is not what you are? What is it in you that recognizes your spirit? What is it in you that hovers between two worlds, the world of the ego's dominion and that of spirit? What is it that recognizes the difference? The answer? The Christ in you. It's easy to imagine how the Christ in you differs from your ego, but not as easy to recognize how the Christ in you differs from spirit. The Christ in you is that which is capable of learning in human form what it means to be an offspring of the Creator. The Christ in you is that which is capable of bridging the two worlds. That is what it was meant by the second coming of Christ. The ego is what you made. Christ is what the Creator made. The ego is your extension of who you think you are. Christ is the Creator's extension of what it is. In order to end the need for learning, you must know who you are and what this means. Where the original Course in Miracles was a course in thought reversal and mind training, a course to point out the insanity of the identity crisis, a course to dislodge the ego's hold, this is a course to establish your identity and to end the reign of the ego. There are still a few who dare to believe in the glory of who they are. Few who can lay aside the idea that to think of themselves in the light of the Creator's thought of them rather than their own would be arrogance. This is only because the ego is not yet and fully gone. You are right to desire to glory the ego, and you are right not to desire to glorify the ego in any way. You know that the ego cannot be glorified and that you would not want it to be. This is why, while the ego remains, you cannot know who you are. The only glory is of the Creator and His creations. That you are among the creations of the Creator cannot be disputed. Thus, all glory is due to you. All glory is yours, and your efforts to protect it from the ego's reach are valiant but unnecessary. The ego cannot claim the glory that is yours. Many of you desire to be foot soldiers, to just live the good life without claiming any glory, without having any grand ideas about yourself. It's possible to do much good without recognizing who you are, and yet it is impossible to be who you are, and you are what this world is for. Your recognition of your capital S self and your recognition of your brothers and sisters, that is what this world is for. To stop before this is accomplished, when it's still in reach, but every bit as insane as belief in the ego. So ask yourself what it is that stops you. As humble as you seem to be in your choice, you're still letting ego make your choice. And this is not humility, but fear. The further teachings of the original course were designed to turn fear into love. When you think you can go only so far and no further in your acceptance of the teachings of the course and the truth of your full self as the Creator created you, then you are abdicating love to fear. You are perhaps making this world a better place, and yet you're not abolishing it. Your acceptance of doing good works and being a good person, in that acceptance, you're accepting the ministry to those who are in hell rather than choosing heaven. You accept what you view as possible and reject what you perceive as impossible. You thus cling to the laws of man and reject the laws of the Creator. You claim your human nature, and yet you reject your divine nature. So, pushing the limits a little bit, asking people to get out of their comfort zone, asking people to get very clear about what is it you fear. And there are various people who've been credited with a quote about how, um, you know, you don't fear failing, you fear stepping into your greatness. You fear the true strength of your nature. Dale Allen Hoffman talks about, and Michael Singer talks about some of the great sages from the East and some gurus whose entire teaching to their students is based around the question, who are you? At deeper and deeper levels, who are you? And using things like koans, the sound of one hand clapping, right? The thought of a statement like, no ignorance, no end to ignorance. To get the conscious logical mind so busy that it kind of burns out or gets exhausted. And then from the genuine yearning and longing within the person, something else bubbles up, an awareness, touching something deeper than their thoughts. And for most of us who've been trained in the Western mind, it's just ridiculous to say there's something deeper than my thoughts, because we've been trained to believe that our thoughts, I think therefore I am, right? It's an old philosophical belief that my thoughts are who I am, and my thoughts about myself are who I am, and my thoughts about you are accurate about who you are, and yet these deeper spiritual teachings let us understand that a thought about a thing is not the thing. Krishnamurti would say that over and over again. The thought is not the thing. You are not what you think about yourself. There's far more going on in any given moment than your process of thoughts. And there's far more going on in your true nature than what gets registered in your conscious logical mind as thought, as belief, which is why it's been so strongly suggested in the Way of Mastery and in the book Butterflies Are Free to Fly that we question all of our beliefs, all of our judgments, all of our opinions. And in that process that was suggested in the work of Butterflies Are Free to Fly, that is called spiritual autolysis, which is very similar to Dr. Michael Rice's Mind Shifter targeted journaling tool, that they suggest we just keep writing and writing until we reach a statement, an observation we can make that is absolutely true in all conditions, that there's no conditional nature in which this isn't true. And that's exactly the kind of thing that Krishnamurti was pushing people towards when they were trying to follow his teachings, that the thought is not the thing. And so as you observe your thoughts and you learn to actively observe your thoughts, you learn to catch how often you spin off away from life itself and direct relationship to life itself into your thoughts. And now you're relating to your thoughts, but you're not relating to the world around you. So Krishnamurti said it's so important to learn to recognize the false parading around as the truth, and learn to see the false as false, and learn to see the truth, bedrock truth, in any given moment. And the truth is not something you can talk about or write about or hand to somebody with a set of statements or beliefs or, stone tablets or whatever. So, here's hoping this is making some sense to people. We've got about 25 minutes left in our first hour today. We're exploring the concepts provided in the introduction to A Course of Love and its combined volume. And the next part of that work that I have highlighted is the statement that by rejecting who you are demonstrating that you think you can believe in some of the truth, but not all of it. Many of you have accepted, for instance, that you are more than your body while you retain belief in the body. You thus have confused yourself further by accepting that you have two selves. An ego self that represents the body or represented by the body, and the spirit self that represents to you an invisible world in which you can believe but not take part. And though in that process you've placed the ego at odds with spirit, giving the ego an internal and invisible foe, namely the spirit, for it to do battle with. And it says, this was hardly the purpose of any teachings of the truth that have as their aim the exact opposite of this conflict-inducing situation. The truth, capital T truth, unites. It does not divide. The truth invites peace, not conflict. Partial truth is not only impossible, it's damaging. For sooner or later, in this lopsided battle, the ego will win out. The spirit, as you have defined it, is too amorphous. It's too much that it lacks definition and therefore believability. So the spirit, as this conflict is set up, will never win this battle of what you perceive as your reality. So you've come close to the truth only to turn your back on it and refuse to see it. You've traveled your path and the end of the journey is in sight, and you stand here at the precipice with a view of a new world glittering with all the beauty of heaven, and yet it's set off just a little distance in a golden light. When you could have seen this sight, you turned your back inside, looking back on a world familiar to you and choosing it instead. You do not see that this choice, even made with every good intention of going back and making a difference, is still a choice for hell, when you could instead have chosen heaven. Yet you know that choosing heaven is the only true way to change the world. It is the exchange of one world for another. This is what you fear to do. You're so afraid to let go of the world that you've known that even though it is a world of conflict and sickness and death, you will not exchange it, and therefore you will not relinquish it. While the Creator remains unknown to you, and you remain unknown to yourself, higher self, capital S self, so too does heaven remain concealed. I am I'm getting a bunch of messages from people, and so I'm being told that there's serious problems with the sound on the app, and I'm being texted outside of the Needle app. So if there's anybody here who's actually hearing me, please write a comment or become a caller so we can find out if any of this is actually going out in the air. You need the Needle app for that. I see a list. Jeannie Rice seems to be on. Susan Bingham seems to be on. Would you please write a comment or yeah, Susan Bingham is now wondering. And No Limit says, I can hear you well. So, and then Jeannie Rice writes, are you not seeing comments? I was not seeing comments in my app. I am now, but I wasn't. So, wondering what to do. Suggestions, Jeannie? Are you able to call? I don't see that anybody's trying to call in, so. Jeannie Rice?
Hey, how are you?
I don't know. That's for you to tell me. Are you hearing any of this? Susan Bingham saying it's really, really bad.
Um, I don't. It sounds okay on this end. The transcript is really off. I noticed that the other day, but
Susan was saying, serious trouble with sound. Perhaps you should hang up and call back in. I've done that, but the problem persists. That's why I'm texting you outside of Needle. You're working hard, and we aren't able to hear most of your words, she says. So,
the I had it turned down for a little while when I was talking to somebody else, but the time that I've had it on, it's pretty clear here.
okay. All right. I don't know why there's no notification about comments, because if I had seen any comments, I would have seen this sooner. But all right. Well, I don't have any other. So here's somebody else texting saying the problem is with Susan's phone. So
Oh, um, are you going to be pre-recording on Podbeam, or are you going to be with us the next couple days or so?
okay. So excellent question. So glad you called in to ask. I've spent some time in the past few days uploading files for the 24th. We'll have Brooke Seam, the interview with Brooke Seam. On Christmas Day, we'll have the interview with Diedrich Wolzak. On the day after Christmas, an interview with Dr. Andrew Pleener and the Same Here Global. And on the 27th, Dr. Pat Ogden and sensory motor psychotherapy and that interview. So at least those, I've also uploaded stuff for Monday and Tuesday next week. And I'm flexible. So if things work out that I'm in a position to actually do a needle show, I'll get on and people can get notified. Otherwise, there will be those Podbean broadcasts. And you can see them if you log into Podbean in the studio. Are you there, Jeannie?
Um,
I heard And the app is spinning and saying we don't have any callers in the queue. So we do have some technical challenges with the Nedl app and the Nedl Studio. And at one point, half an hour ago apparently, Susan Bingham was wondering if I was doing something funny with my phone. But no, I'm just sitting here plugged in, and Jeannie just texted, so you can't hear me. No, right now, Jeannie, I'm not hearing you. And try again. Try talking again, because it says no call accepted at the moment. So we will send this app and the recording to the Nedl people, and they can do their magic to help us refine the technology and hopefully make it more efficient. And it's been interesting watching. Somebody else says the app's been fine the entire program. So it's been interesting watching the number of people who seem to be listeners fluctuate from 3 to 5 to 7 to 3. And I don't know if people are actually experiencing getting kicked off or if they're busy with other things and then leaving and coming back. But it says now that Jeannie has rejoined the live show, but it does not say that she's in queue to speak. So help us out if you can. Press the phone button to get yourself in queue to say hello. We won't force you to stay on long, but we'll just verify that things are working and people are actually hearing what's happening in the show. And in lieu of that, I was, for those who could hear, I was reading the introduction to A Course in Love. And the idea that they're trying to get at is we can't view ourselves as tiny and limited and still step into our full magnificence. That's the essence of it. Here is someone by the name of Joe Bryson.
That's me. Can you hear me?
I do hear you. How are things going? Are you able to hear the broadcast? 1, 2, 3. We're testing for Joe. Well, I heard, can you hear me? And then nothing else. So wondering if there's some serious limitation on that end of the show, technologically speaking. Joe, are you there? So we have Joe, but we're not hearing Joe. And maybe others are hearing Joe. Maybe Joe's talking to the audience and I can't hear him. But we'll sort this out with our technical people later. And I haven't had any text message or any comments for a while. Jeannie Shaw just commented that she cannot hear Joe. Donald says he can't hear Joe. So, Joe, we are not hearing you. Maybe you can hear me. All right, so Joe says he can hear me, and even though the technology says Joe is in the queue and his phone is working, we can't hear Joe. So thank you for trying, Joe. I don't know what to tell you or anybody else, but we will get this recording and transcript to our people at Nedl, and maybe they'll be able to sort it out for us so that in the future it'll work more smoothly. So at this stage of the game, without any way to know exactly how many people are hearing and not hearing, oh, I hear a sound. Would that be Joe? No, that was Joe hanging up apparently. So, all right, well, I'm going to wrap this up since I don't know how much is getting out or not getting out. I would strongly encourage anybody who's there to come back on for the second hour with Michael and Jeannie Rice. Maybe Jeannie will have a better time in the studio than I've been having for whatever reason. So I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of this stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false.